Okay, what is this slideshow about? I taught a class on this material on July 10th, 2015 at the Spanish Fork Library. So this is the information that I covered, and there were people who had expressed an interest in the class, but either for work schedule or health issues were not able to come. So I have included narration along with a slideshow, and then I'm going to post it so that it is available for those who were not able to come. If you are not one of those, and that's not the reason that you're here, and you found the slides some other way, you are welcome to the material to listen to it. If you would like to reuse the slide or present it in any way, if you would please clear it with me first, and I am including my phone number and my email address. The class that I presented was free, and this material and the class is always free, so if you have a group that you feel would benefit from this material and you would like me to do a presentation, I'd be glad to. I present anywhere in Utah Valley. I do ask that you have about 8 to 10 people or more scheduled in your group, just so we have enough for a discussion. And so if you have that size group and you would like me to come, please give me a phone call or send me an email. I am a marriage and family therapist licensed in the state of Utah. I am in private practice. I also have an interest in training in neurofeedback, which is a kind of biofeedback that uses brainwaves. I'm also very interested in brain plasticity and brain training. My website is listed below if you'd like to learn more about me or my practice. Okay, who is this technique designed for? This technique is designed for anyone who has intense worry or anxiety that he or she knows does not reflect reality or have a purpose. So this is for someone who has a worry that persists in a worry loop, that they know everything is okay, that they know that the worry does not reflect their situation. So an example would be someone who has an intense worry that their house is going to catch on fire. So if that person might check the stove, check the fireplace, and even though they know that their house is in good condition, they still have that persistent anxiety that something is wrong and that they need to continue to check and be vigilant for fire. This kind of anxiety is very resistant to attempts on the part of the person who has it or on attempts from loved ones to counter it. So the loved ones around this person might reassure them or make their best attempt to reassure them that everything really is fine, that their house is not any more likely to catch fire than anyone else's house, and that they can relax, and that the person might know that, but the anxiety persists anyway. The anxiety is uncomfortable enough that it can give rise to unhealthy habits that are meant to manage the anxiety. So compulsive behavior, drug use, self-harm, all of those are attempts to manage that rising anxiety. It may work in the short term, but it actually strengthens the anxiety over the long term. When should it be used? Well, just as far as another item from the last slide, this technique is not useful for someone who has trouble telling that their anxiety does not reflect reality. So if there's someone who really believes that their unrealistic worry is real, then that is another mental health issue that needs addressing from a doctor, and may need medication and other kinds of counseling and support. So this technique would not be helpful for someone who really believes that their worry reflects reality, even when the loved ones around that person knows that it doesn't. Okay, so when should this be used? It should be used when the anxious thoughts do not have a lesson to teach. So this is where the person has actually taken all the steps needed to resolve the thing that they are worried about, and the anxious thoughts persist anyway. So there's no constructive action that needs to be taken. So just as an example, if someone is worried that their house is going to catch on fire, if their house really is a fire trap, then there is a lesson there, and that anxiety is actually helpful. It's healthy in that situation to prompt the person to take action. If someone's really worried their house is going to catch fire and their house is in good condition, they have their fire alarms, they have their fire extinguishers, then that's an example where this technique could be used, because the action has already been taken that needs to be. Also can be used where the anxiety is taking energy away from other productive activities. Okay, I'm going to take a step back and just talk about neuroplasticity for a couple of slides. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to make new neural pathways in response to a change in the environment or to damage in brain tissue. Okay, so new neural pathways occur when you give intense focus and time to an activity. So what this means is that our brain pathways are set to learn. Our brain is designed to help us learn. So if we have a pathway that we use often in our thoughts and our behaviors, then those pathways tend to be strengthened, but they don't have to be used that way. It is possible to change it, and that's what neuroplasticity is that we have choices over how we strengthen and extinguish neural pathways. And pathways are strengthened when there is a pleasurable outcome, even if it's temporary. And then pathways that were assigned to other activities can be assigned to the new pathway, strengthening it. So pathways that are used often are strengthened by having other pathways nearby join them. So it makes it that pathway stronger and stronger the more it gets used, and pathways that aren't used often tend to be extinguished and lose ground. And so a worry anxiety pathway that is frequently used will be strengthened to the point where it feels automatic, and it will also recruit other pathways and pick up speed. So what these two slides are to illustrate is that neural pathway that does not get used very much is like that lonely country road, not a lot of speed, potholes, bumps, and that's a neural pathway that's infrequently used. One that's used all the time is like the superhighway. So there's whatever pathways are used are strengthened. So why don't these worry loops happen to everybody? All our brains are a little different. No brain is exactly the same. We are individuals, and our experience shapes our neural pathways. So some people are more prone to having anxious neural pathways than others, and then they get strengthened through use. So this illustrates, this slide shows the parts of the brain that are involved in those neural pathways, and it's from the work of Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Begley, and they did some brain imaging, and they discovered that the orbital frontal cortex is the part of the brain that activates when we detect a potential problem or mistake. And then the cingulate gyrus tells us that something horrible or something bad will happen if the problem is not fixed. So you can see how these actually would be helpful in the case of the house that's fire trapped. Then the orbital frontal cortex says, fix the house. And the cingulate gyrus says, this is going to be really bad if this house catches on fire. And then the caudate nucleus activates after the mistake has been corrected or the problem resolved. And then it shifts brain activity to something else. So once the problem has been fixed, then the caudate nucleus provides that sort of release feeling, that, okay, well, I took care of that. The checked off the list feeling. For some people, that caudate nucleus does not shift easily enough, and so it becomes stuck. So the orbital frontal cortex continues to activate, saying there's a problem. The cingulate gyrus continues to fire, saying this is horrible, I've got to do something. But that activation, that resolution feeling never comes. It's an anxious loop. The stuck caudate creates a pathway like a circular track. So there's an anxious thought, a provoking thought, then there's anxiety and discomfort rises. There's no feeling of resolution, so the brain goes back to the anxious thought again and goes over that, and then anxiety continues to spiral upwards, leading to a very uncomfortable situation. Neuroplasticity got you into this. The good news is it can get you out. There is something that you can do about this. You can create a new pathway. So the same process that strengthened your anxious pathway can strengthen a calming pathway, and the old pathway can fade away through lack of traffic. So if you leave that super freeway alone long enough, then eventually it will start to crumble, and that brain real estate will be transferred to some other activity that you're doing more often. So Dr. Schwartz called this manually shifting the caudate. So instead of having an automatic shift, which we would all like to have, sometimes it doesn't shift manually, automatically. It needs to be shifted manually. Okay, what is step one? Step one is become your own teacher. So do you take an emotional step back and observe your thoughts? What kinds of thoughts began that pathway, and when were they triggered? So the purpose of this is just to gather information. So I'll try the best you can to avoid any judgments of those thoughts. Just gather information. So it's easy to think, oh, this is so stupid. Why am I thinking like this? That is stepping back into the emotional loop. So it works much better to step outside of that and just notice what kind of thoughts are going on and what the triggers are. Okay, and then choose one to start working on. So just one. The others, unfortunately, will be there later. Okay, so the next step is, once you've decided the neural pathway, the neural loop that you want to tackle, then you could think through, well, if I'm observing this pathway, then I can relabel it, I can name it. So you could tell yourself, this is not about, for example, this is not about my house catching on fire, this is not about a tornado hitting my house, or this is not about germs that might make my family ill. This is my brain in a sticky loop. I can decide to do something different. I can use a new alternate pathway. So it's relabeling the sticky loop for what it is. It's a sticky loop. It's not actually about what the content of the worry is. And the next step is to focus intensely on the new pathway. So attention is the traffic on the neural pathway. So you want to put the traffic onto your new road instead of on the old road. So breathe and focus on your healthy activity and thoughts. Sometimes the anxiety will stay anyway. That's okay. Just refusing to act on it, even temporarily, will weaken the pathway. So be patient with yourself, and just the anxiety will go away at some point, but it's okay if it doesn't right away, and you can just sit with it and know it will weaken eventually, and you don't have to force it. And trying to force it actually makes it worse because it puts the attention back on the old anxious pathway instead of on your new one. So just let it sit there and don't pay a lot of attention to it. So your old pathway wasn't made all at once, and so it will take time to strengthen your new pathway. If I have this slide, this picture of the Colosseum, because I could just imagine our thoughts and them being like the charioteers going round and round and round in this neural path, and over decades, and sometimes our neural pathways can feel that way. So it takes a while for those to change. Okay, step 5 is to repeat the other steps. So repetition, remember, focus and practice are the traffic. So you want to keep directing the traffic down that new neural pathway. Keep focusing and keep breathing and be patient. Okay, what are some examples of calming activities you could do to create a new neural pathway? So if the provoking thought and feelings come up, then what could you do instead? So it's good to make a list. Your list will be a little different than anyone else's, and that's okay. I have a list of some examples. You could exercise that takes focus, learn a new skill, play an instrument, learn a language, focus on your work. If you have work that you can, some part of your work that takes a lot of focus, and you can do that part. I have an example of someone who has called someone to talk. It's important, if you choose that option, not to talk about the worry, because then again you're giving focus and increasing traffic on the old pathway. So if you call someone, that's great, that's a great thing to do, but talk about something else and not about your worry. I have a couple slides on essential oils. I am not an expert on essential oils, and I don't sell them. That's not part of my practice. But I have noticed that they have a chemical benefit, and they do help strengthen a neural pathway. So I wanted to include that as an option. Okay, once you have your list of calming activities, alternate activities that take focus, then if you combine them, then you create an even stronger neural pathway. So I have an example of this braided rope. So you can take different calming activities and put them together. I have one person in my class said that she likes to put on an oil diffuser with a calming oil and play her violin, because that takes a lot of focus, and the two together create a new neural pathway. So after that, even if she's somewhere not by her violin, she could still use her calming oil to trigger that feeling of focus and calm that she had when she was doing the two things together. So a social stretch means reaching out, doing something that's a little out of your comfort zone. A mental stretch is something mentally that takes a lot of focus. I don't do Sudoku, but I know people who do and love that, and that is a great way to shift focus. So someone could put on calming music and do a Sudoku, and that would pair two things together. Sometimes physical movement that takes focus. It can also be combined with deep breathing and calming breathing to also create a combination. So if you are working through these slides, then my suggestion at this point would be to take your list of calming activities and take a few that could go together. And once you've practiced those two together, then you don't have to do both of them at the same time. You can use one to trigger the calming that you'd get from them both. There are other ways that you can combine different calming activities. One way you can do that is by creating a mental calming place. This picture is a cathedral, and the reason I included that is just an experience I had when I was 18 years old and we traveled with my family to southern Spain. And I had this experience of having it be really hot and busy and bright outside, and then stepping into the cathedrals, and it was just cool, and there's light streaming in through the windows. It was shady. There's this wonderful smell of frankincense that they'd use in their services. So the experience of going to the cathedral was like coming outside of something really busy and into something very calm and peaceful. So that is a very useful image for me when I want to step outside of some of the busy mental chatter that's going on and just other activities that are going on in my life and demanding my attention. Is if I focus on this image, then it helps me go back to that calm place. So if you work with an image like this, you need to involve as many senses as possible. So that's where the oil was helpful for me, that frankincense, because it goes along with this image that I have created. So just the oil on its own now helps to trigger that calming image. So this place will be different for everyone. If you create a calming image, then you can have it be wherever works for you to take you outside of that anxiety and into a calm place that gives you a wider perspective and a feeling of peace. And if you choose music, then that can be helpful, but if you need to get back to that mental place later, you don't have to sit and do that meditation every time. You can use music or deep breaths or whatever it is that you've worked along with it to trigger that image for yourself. This is my last slide. I just wanted to quickly cover biofeedback. Biofeedback is a term that covers anything where you get feedback on how your body is functioning so that your body can adjust. So an example is observing your breathing. If you sit quietly and put your attention on your breathing without forcing it to change, you'll notice that over time that your breath will deepen and your whole nervous system will relax. The same thing happens when you count your pulse or when you observe muscles that are tight. So it's important not to try and force your breathing or force relaxation, but to just observe it. And then that feedback will help the nervous system regulate and to calm itself down. I also wanted to mention neurofeedback. That's something that is not typically something people can do on their own. It involves having the person go into a neurofeedback clinician and being hooked up to electrodes. The electrodes read the brain activity and display it back on a screen for the brain to observe, and then the brain uses that to adjust. So it's helpful for many issues, particularly for migraines, for ADHD, seizures, and depression and anxiety as well. So it has a lot of usefulness. It's very helpful, but again, it's something that's difficult to do on your own. That is the end of my presentation. So I hope that is helpful. And again, if you'd like me to teach a class, then please give me a call.